Imagine walking into a place where reputation means absolutely nothing. No fame. No spotlight. No special treatment. Just people watching. In that kind of environment, the usual rules disappear. Titles don't matter. Status fades. Even confidence can feel different when no one recognizes who you are. Now imagine this. A quiet room. Conversations fading in the background. The kind of place where everyone notices subtle changes. A shift in posture, a glance held a little too long, a step that slightly crosses someone else's space. And right there, across the room, someone is already watching. Not aggressively. Just observing. Sometimes, that silent observation can feel more intense than any loud challenge. Because in unfamiliar environments, people often test each other. Not always with words. Not always with confrontation. Sometimes it's simply about presence. Who moves first? Who reacts? Who stays calm? Now picture someone like Keanu Reeves entering a moment like this. Not the movie version. Not the action hero character. Just a person walking into a room where nobody is impressed by reputation. What happens then? Would calm confidence still hold its ground? Or would the pressure of the moment change everything? Because situations like this reveal something interesting about human behavior. When tension slowly builds in a room, most people respond in predictable ways. Some try to dominate the space. Others become defensive. A few avoid eye contact completely. But every once in a while, someone responds differently. They don't rush. They don't react emotionally. They simply observe, control their breathing, and remain completely present. That kind of composure can change the entire atmosphere of a room. Because when one person refuses to play the usual game of ego and intimidation, the tension often shifts in unexpected ways. And that raises an interesting question. What actually defines strength in a moment like this? Is it the loudest voice in the room? The most intimidating presence? Or the person who stays calm when everyone else expects a reaction? Because sometimes the most powerful moment in any confrontation isn't when something dramatic happens. It's the quiet second right before it. And in that second, everything depends on how someone chooses to respond. The story you're about to hear explores exactly that kind of moment. A fictional scenario inspired by the idea of discipline under pressure. And the outcome might not be what most people expect. Moments like the one we imagine don't usually begin with loud conflict. They begin quietly. With observation. With people trying to understand the atmosphere around them. In unfamiliar environments, this kind of silent evaluation happens all the time. Humans naturally read signals from each other. Posture, confidence, hesitation, eye contact. Without a single word spoken, people are constantly measuring the space around them. And sometimes that silent exchange creates tension. Not the explosive kind seen in movies, but a slower, more psychological pressure. Someone steps a little closer than necessary. Another person holds eye contact for a moment longer than usual. Someone else shifts their stance, almost as if they're deciding whether to engage or step away. These moments rarely turn into dramatic confrontations. In reality, they are usually small tests of presence and composure. Who reacts first? Who gets uncomfortable? Who keeps control of their emotions? This is why environments with unfamiliar people often feel unpredictable. Everyone is trying to understand the unspoken rules of the room. Now imagine a person entering that kind of atmosphere, someone known publicly for calm focus and disciplined preparation. That's one reason people often reference Keanu Reeves when discussing composure under pressure. Not because of fictional action scenes, but because of the way he approaches preparation for film roles. For example, in movies like John Wick, the character's calm demeanor and controlled movement became a major part of the story's appeal. The character doesn't react emotionally to every challenge. Instead, he observes first, reacts second, and rarely allows tension to control his behavior. Of course, films exaggerate reality. Actors train for choreography, camera timing, and performance, not real confrontation. But the discipline behind that preparation can still shape how someone carries themselves in stressful situations. Training for demanding roles often requires focus, patience, and repetition. Those habits can influence posture, breathing, and awareness even outside of a film set. And that's where the psychological part of our story becomes interesting. Because when someone maintains calm body language in a tense environment, it can subtly change how others behave around them. Confidence, real confidence, doesn't always look dramatic. It often looks quiet. So, controlled. Imagine again that room we described earlier. People talking quietly. Subtle glances. Someone testing the atmosphere with silent observation. Now picture a person who doesn't rush to respond to that pressure. Instead of reacting quickly, They take a moment to simply understand what's happening around them. That alone can shift the dynamic. Because most people expect emotional reactions. They expect tension to grow, voices to rise, or someone to try proving dominance. But when someone refuses to play that game, the energy in the room begins to change. Silence becomes noticeable. Movement becomes slower. People start questioning their assumptions. Was that tension real? Or did they misread the situation? Psychologists often point out that humans mirror each other's emotional states. When one person becomes aggressive, others respond defensively. But when someone stays calm, it can sometimes lower the emotional intensity of the entire environment. And that's the deeper theme behind this fictional scenario. It's not about confrontation. It's about composure. Because the most powerful moments in high-pressure situations are rarely loud or dramatic. They're quiet, measured, and often decided in the small choices people make before anything actually happens. The question is, when tension begins to build in a room, what kind of response changes the outcome the most? An aggressive one, or a calm one? The atmosphere in the room didn't change suddenly. It changed slowly. Almost so slowly that most people wouldn't notice it at first. Conversations continued in low voices. Chairs shifted slightly. Glasses touched the table with soft sounds. On the surface, everything appeared normal. But beneath that calm surface, something subtle was happening. The tension was shifting. A few people had already noticed the quiet tension forming between two sides of the room. Not because anyone raised their voice. Not because anyone made a threat. But because human instincts are very good at detecting changes in energy. Someone had stepped a little closer than before. Not aggressively. Just enough to reduce the distance. In social situations, distance matters more than most people realize. A small step forward can send a message without a single word being spoken. It can mean curiosity. It can mean challenge. Or it can simply mean someone is testing how another person reacts. Across the room stood Keanu Reeves, quietly observing the environment around him. There was no dramatic reaction. No sudden movement. Just stillness. That stillness, however, can be powerful. Because when someone refuses to react quickly, it forces everyone else to slow down as well. The person who had stepped closer seemed to notice this. For a moment there was a pause. A brief moment where both sides simply observed each other. Eye contact can say a lot in situations like this. Too little eye contact can signal discomfort. Too much can feel confrontational. But calm, neutral attention often sends a completely different message. It suggests awareness, confidence, control. The room itself began to grow quieter. Not silent, but quieter. People nearby started paying attention without making it obvious. Someone leaned back slightly in their chair. Another person paused mid-conversation, listening more carefully than before. Moments like this can stretch longer than they feel. A few seconds can seem like a minute when tension is building slowly. The man testing the space shifted his weight slightly, as if deciding what to do next. His posture suggested curiosity rather than aggression, but curiosity can still create pressure in an unfamiliar environment. Would the other person step back? Would they speak? Would they react emotionally? Instead, something unexpected happened. There was no visible challenge. No attempt to dominate the space. Instead, there was a small adjustment, almost unnoticeable. A controlled breath. A relaxed posture. And a calm shift of stance that suggested balance rather than defense. That tiny movement communicated something important. Not confrontation, but readiness. People often assume strength must look dramatic. Loud voices, strong gestures, bold declarations. Yet real composure often appears quiet and steady. The kind of calm that doesn't demand attention but naturally attracts it. Now the situation had subtly changed. The person who stepped closer seemed to recognize this shift. Not because of anything aggressive, but because calm responses often remove the tension people expect to build. When someone expects a reaction and doesn't get one, uncertainty replaces confidence. Was this person ignoring the pressure? Or were they simply unaffected by it? The difference matters. Because psychological tension works both ways. The moment someone realizes their attempt to create pressure isn't working, they often begin reassessing the situation themselves. And that's exactly what seemed to be happening here. The room wasn't witnessing a confrontation. It was witnessing a test of composure. And tests like that are rarely decided by force. They're decided by patience, by awareness, and by the quiet decisions people make in moments when everyone else expects something dramatic to happen. But the most surprising part of this moment was that the tension hadn't reached its peak yet. For several long seconds, nothing dramatic happened. And yet, The atmosphere in the room had clearly changed. People nearby could feel it. That quiet tension that had been building slowly now seemed to pause, almost as if the moment itself was waiting to see what would happen next. The man who had stepped closer earlier remained standing there. His posture suggested curiosity mixed with uncertainty. It was the kind of stance people adopt when they expect a reaction, when they believe the next moment will reveal something important. But the reaction he expected never arrived. Across from him, Keanu Reeves still appeared completely composed. Not distant. Not defensive. Just present. That difference mattered. Because when tension builds between people, reactions usually follow predictable patterns. Someone becomes louder. Someone shifts aggressively. Someone attempts to dominate the situation through confidence or intimidation. But when none of those responses appear, the entire dynamic can change. The room seemed to recognize this shift almost instantly. The quiet conversations nearby slowed even further. Someone leaned slightly forward in their seat. Another person casually pretended to check their phone, though their attention clearly remained on the unfolding moment. The air felt heavier now. Not with danger, but with curiosity. The man testing the situation took another small step, though this time the movement was slower, less certain. He seemed to be studying the reaction in front of him. Or perhaps the lack of one. Calm composure can create a strange effect in moments like this. When someone refuses to respond emotionally, it removes the tension others expect to build. And when expectations disappear, people start questioning themselves. Was the pressure real? Or had it only seemed real in the moment? Still, the space between them had become slightly smaller. Not enough to feel confrontational, but enough for the shift in body language to become more noticeable. That's when something subtle happened. Not dramatic. Not aggressive. Just a quiet adjustment. Keanu Reeves shifted his stance slightly, redistributing his balance with the kind of natural ease that comes from calm awareness. To most people watching, the movement would have seemed almost meaningless. But small movements often communicate powerful signals. The adjustment suggested confidence, stability, and perhaps most importantly, control. It wasn't a defensive posture. It wasn't a challenge. It simply showed that the moment had been fully understood. The man standing nearby seemed to notice this immediately. His posture changed as well. Not because he had been confronted, but because the tension he expected to grow had suddenly lost its direction. When people anticipate conflict, they prepare themselves for escalation, raised voices, emotional reactions, aggressive gestures. But when calm composure replaces those reactions, the psychological balance shifts. Suddenly the person who expected to create pressure begins feeling the pressure instead. And that realization seemed to spread quietly across the room. The atmosphere softened slightly. Not completely, but enough for the energy between them to feel different. Instead of tension building upward, it seemed to settle into something quieter, more thoughtful. The man who had stepped forward earlier exhaled slowly, as if reconsidering his assumptions. Perhaps the moment he expected simply wasn't going to happen. Or perhaps he had misunderstood the person standing in front of him. Either way, the test, if it had been a test, no longer carried the same weight. Because the calm response had already answered the question. Strength doesn't always appear through force. Sometimes it appears through restraint. Sometimes the most powerful message someone can send is the decision not to escalate tension that others are expecting. The people watching nearby seemed to sense that realization as well. The quiet curiosity in the room began dissolving into something more ordinary again. Conversation slowly resumed. Chairs shifted. The room's natural rhythm returned. Yet something about the moment lingered. Because everyone present had just witnessed something subtle but important. Not a confrontation. Not a dramatic victory. But a shift in atmosphere created entirely through composure. And in many ways, that kind of quiet control can be more powerful than any loud reaction. But what made the moment even more interesting was how differently people outside the room might interpret it. If a moment like the one we just described happened today, something interesting would likely follow. Not in the room itself, but online. Because in the modern world, quiet moments rarely stay quiet for long. Someone might record a few seconds on their phone. Another person might post a short clip with a dramatic caption. And within hours, thousands, sometimes millions, of people could begin forming opinions about what they believe happened. But here's the strange part. Most people watching that clip wouldn't see the full story. They wouldn't see the slow buildup of tension. They wouldn't see the small shifts in posture or the quiet decisions made in those few seconds of silence. Instead, they would see only fragments. And from those fragments, the internet usually asks one simple question. Who won? It's a question that appears everywhere in online discussions. Who dominated the moment? Who backed down? Who proved they were stronger? But that question often misses something important. Because moments like the one that happened in that room aren't always about winning. They're about understanding pressure. They're about recognizing when a situation doesn't need to escalate. And they're about realizing that calm behavior can sometimes change the outcome more effectively than aggression. Imagine the clip spreading across social media. One group of viewers might say, "He stood his ground. That shows confidence." Another group might argue, "He didn't react. Maybe he was avoiding confrontation." Others might try analyzing every detail, the distance between the two people, the shift in posture, even the expressions on their faces. Online debates can turn even the smallest moment into a massive discussion. And because the person involved happens to be someone recognizable like Keanu Reeves, the reactions would probably grow even stronger. Fans might immediately assume they understand what happened. Critics might create completely different interpretations. But the truth about moments like this is often much simpler than the internet believes. Real strength rarely looks dramatic. It rarely creates headlines. And it rarely produces the kind of explosive reaction people expect when tension appears. Instead, it often appears in quiet decisions. The decision to stay calm. The decision to observe instead of react. The decision to let a tense moment dissolve rather than turn it into something bigger. Those decisions can look unimpressive in a short video clip. They might not satisfy people who expect a clear winner or loser. But in reality, those choices often prevent situations from becoming unnecessary confrontations. Psychologists sometimes talk about something called emotional mirroring, the tendency for people to copy the emotional energy they see in others. If one person becomes aggressive, the other person often responds with aggression as well. If one person raises their voice, the other person may raise theirs even higher. But when someone remains calm, the emotional energy of the situation can change in a completely different direction. That's what seemed to happen in that room. The moment didn't end with a dramatic confrontation. It ended with tension slowly dissolving. The pressure that had been building simply lost its purpose. And when pressure has nowhere to go, it eventually disappears. Yet the internet often struggles to understand moments like that. Because quiet control doesn't create viral drama. Calm restraint doesn't produce shocking headlines. And composure rarely looks as exciting as confrontation. So if the clip were posted online, the debates would probably continue for days. People would analyze it from every angle. Some would claim one person had clearly dominated the situation. Others would argue the opposite. But those arguments would likely ignore the most important detail. The real outcome had nothing to do with dominance. Nothing to do with intimidation. And nothing to do with victory. The real outcome was that a tense moment never became something worse. And sometimes, that's the most powerful result a situation can have. Because the strongest response isn't always the one people expect to see. Sometimes the strongest response is the one that prevents the confrontation entirely. And that realization leads to a much deeper question. If strength isn't always about winning a moment, then what does real strength actually look like? When the tension in the room finally faded, something interesting remained. Not noise. Not excitement. Just a quiet understanding that something subtle had taken place. Most people eventually returned to their conversations. Chairs moved again. Background voices slowly filled the space the way they had before. But moments like that rarely disappear completely. They leave behind a small question in the minds of the people who witnessed them. What actually happened there? Some might say nothing happened at all. After all, there was no confrontation. No dramatic argument. No moment where someone clearly won or lost. Yet the absence of conflict was exactly what made the moment meaningful. Because situations like that often reveal something deeper about how people handle pressure. Many people believe strength is loud. They imagine confidence as something bold and visible, strong gestures, raised voices, powerful reactions. But real confidence often looks very different. Real confidence is quiet. It doesn't rush to prove itself. It doesn't feel the need to dominate every moment. Instead, it shows itself through patience, through awareness, through the ability to stay calm when others expect tension to grow. That kind of composure can take years to develop. It often comes from discipline, the kind of discipline people practice in many areas of life. Athletes train for it. Performers learn it. Professionals develop it through experience and preparation. And in the case of public figures like Keanu Reeves, many people admire that calm approach because it appears both on and off the screen. In films like John Wick or The Matrix, audiences often see characters who remain focused under intense pressure. Those characters rarely panic. Instead, they observe carefully and respond with precision. Of course, movies exaggerate those qualities for dramatic storytelling. But the reason those characters resonate with audiences is because they reflect something people recognize in real life. The idea that calm thinking can be more powerful than emotional reactions. Think about situations you've experienced personally. Moments where pressure suddenly appeared, perhaps during an argument, a stressful conversation, or an unexpected challenge. In those moments, reactions usually fall into a few common patterns. Some people respond immediately with emotion. Some raise their voices. Others become defensive or try to dominate the situation quickly. But occasionally, someone chooses a different response. They pause. They listen. They take a moment to understand the situation before reacting. That pause can completely change the direction of the moment. Because when one person slows down the emotional energy in a tense situation, others often follow without even realizing it. The conversation becomes calmer. The pressure begins to dissolve. And what could have become a confrontation slowly turns into something manageable. That's why discipline is often described as quiet strength. It's not about avoiding challenges. It's about choosing the most thoughtful response when those challenges appear. The moment in that room reflected exactly that idea. The tension had been real. The pressure had been noticeable. But the response to that pressure determined what happened next. Instead of escalating the moment, calm composure redirected it. Instead of confrontation, there was understanding. And instead of conflict, there was simply space. Space for the tension to fade naturally. Space for people to return to normal conversation. Space for the moment to end without anyone needing to prove anything. For the people who witnessed it, the lesson may have been subtle. But subtle lessons are often the ones that stay with us the longest. Because they reveal something about human behavior that isn't always obvious. Strength doesn't always appear in dramatic moments. It often appears in quiet decisions. The decision to stay calm. The decision to think clearly under pressure. The decision to respond with control instead of emotion. Those choices rarely make headlines. They rarely go viral online. But in everyday life, they shape the way people navigate difficult situations again and again. And that leads to one final realization. If real strength is quiet, then perhaps the strongest person in any room isn't the one who proves something to everyone else. It might simply be the one who never needed to prove it in the first place. After everything settled, the room slowly returned to normal. People resumed their conversations. Someone laughed quietly at a joke from across the table. A few chairs moved as guests adjusted their seats again. The background noise that had faded during the tense moment gradually filled the room once more. To anyone who walked in at that point, nothing would have seemed unusual. But the people who had witnessed the earlier moment understood something subtle had happened. Not a confrontation. Not a dramatic showdown. Just a quiet test of composure that had come and gone without turning into anything bigger. Moments like that often disappear quickly. They don't leave behind loud stories or shocking headlines. Yet sometimes they leave behind something more valuable, perspective. Because situations involving tension often reveal how people define strength. Many people grow up believing strength must always be visible. They imagine it as something bold, loud, and impossible to ignore. But real life has a way of challenging that belief. Real life shows that strength can appear in quieter forms. Patience, awareness, control. Those qualities rarely attract attention at first, but they shape outcomes in ways people don't always notice immediately. Think about the moment that unfolded earlier. A small amount of tension had entered the room. Two people shared the same space. There was curiosity. There was uncertainty. And there was the possibility that things could escalate. But escalation never happened. Why? Because someone chose composure over reaction. That choice alone changed the entire direction of the moment. Instead of tension growing louder, it faded. Instead of a confrontation becoming the center of attention, the situation quietly dissolved. That's something many people overlook when they watch moments like this from the outside. Especially on the internet. Online discussions often focus on dominance. Who intimidated who? Who proved themselves stronger? Who backed down? But those questions rarely capture the deeper reality of human behavior. Because strength doesn't always mean overpowering someone else. Sometimes it means understanding when power isn't necessary. That idea is one reason why people often admire public figures who carry themselves with calm confidence. Someone like Keanu Reeves is often mentioned in conversations about composure because his public presence tends to reflect that quiet confidence. Whether appearing in interviews, public events, or demanding film roles such as John Wick, audiences often notice the same characteristic, a calm, thoughtful demeanor rather than loud displays of ego. Of course, movies are fictional. The action and drama are designed for entertainment. But the reason audiences connect with those characters isn't just the action scenes. It's the mindset behind them. The idea that someone can remain focused even when pressure builds around them. The idea that discipline and patience can be more powerful than emotional reactions. Those ideas resonate with people because they apply far beyond movies. They apply to everyday life. Everyone faces moments where tension appears unexpectedly. A difficult conversation at work. A disagreement with a friend. A stressful situation where emotions begin rising quickly. In those moments, the instinct to react immediately can feel overwhelming. People raise their voices. They interrupt. They try to prove their point as quickly as possible. But occasionally, someone chooses a different path. They slow down. They listen. They remain calm long enough to understand what's really happening. That pause, that small moment of control, can completely change the outcome. Arguments dissolve before they grow larger. Misunderstandings become easier to resolve. Pressure fades before it turns into conflict. Those quiet choices rarely look impressive in the moment. But over time, they define the kind of presence someone brings into every environment they enter. And that's why the moment in that room mattered. Not because anyone won. Not because anyone lost. But because the situation revealed something deeper about the nature of strength. Strength doesn't always demand attention. It doesn't always require applause. And it certainly doesn't need to prove itself through confrontation. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is simply the one who understands the moment well enough to let tension pass without feeding it. The one who recognizes that calm awareness can shift an entire atmosphere. The one who chooses patience when everyone else expects aggression. That kind of strength may never trend online. It may never become a viral headline. But in the real world, it quietly shapes the way people experience leadership, confidence, and respect. And perhaps that's the real message behind this story. Not every challenge needs to be answered with force. Not every moment of pressure requires a dramatic response. Sometimes the most powerful action is the simplest one. To remain calm. To stay aware. And to allow the moment to pass without turning it into something unnecessary. Because in the end, the strongest person in the room may not be the one who wins the confrontation. It may simply be the one who never needed it in the first place.